I'll be talking about population projections. That's where my specialty sort of resides within demography. I do the official population projections for the state of Georgia. These are the ones that they use for determining how many beds hospitals need and how many beds prisons need, roadway, schools, all the sort of really baseline information that you need for infrastructure planning. Population projections are sort of the baseline. And so I'll talk about a bit about the project as we go forward. I wanted to briefly talk about some of the other projects that I do because I do a wide range of work. Being in an applied setting really lends itself to having really interesting questions that don't fit in any particular place, especially with where different areas intersect together. So these are some examples of some recent work we've been doing with our Board of Regents for the university system in Georgia. The USG comprises right around 33 member institutions, and that includes Georgia Tech, UGA, Georgia State, as well as places like Waycross College or Albany State. It's a very big cross-section. We were able to get almost free-rein access to every piece of administrative data that they collect. So we have course pattern histories, we have financial aid information, we have GPAs at graduation, SAT scores. We scrubbed most of that data, and we're able to do some really cool things with it. One of the things is mapping where students actually come from versus native students, the students who enroll natively, as well as transfer students who transfer in, where they come from. Those are some really great maps showing that. And also within transfer movements, so this is a really cool circular migration flow plot that we've created for them. It's actually animated. This is the static version, so they can actually drill down in and understand where students come from or go to, as well as some more detailed information in terms of the background that students come from. So here's an example of the distribution of the household income for it. I don't even know which one that is. Dalton State or Gordon State, one of those ones. So this is just some of the more type of work that I do. It's not just education related as well, or environmental. I did some work with the Department of Juvenile Justice and our Governor's Office of Children and Families looking at disproportionate minority contact within the justice system. So when juveniles enter into the system, where is this disproportionality occurring within the system? I'm actually working on a manuscript right now to convert the methodology for life expectancy, so how we do a life table to convert it instead of how long or how many years you would expect to live to how many stages in the justice system would you go through. So, right, arrest, prosecution, all the way on through. As well as social vulnerability, which is right on coastal Georgia. People are pretty concerned with.
So Matthew, this is more of an institutional question about the Institute again, though. So do you get a portion of funding just directly from the state government, and then clients come and pay for individual projects? Are you built into legislation or regulations within the state that says you are officially the guy who's going to tell me how many people live in Georgia?
Yeah, so it's actually a mixture of all of that. So we do have some hard money, so we do have some state monies that do come in to support various programs. We also have quite a bit of contract work as well. I have a feeling that our governor right now is a big fan of contract work, since you end up with a measurable sort of product that gets produced, so something can be tracked. You're producing this for this purpose, as opposed to just, I'm doing some really cool stuff that's really interesting, man. Yeah. That way we can kind of track it as it goes. And we do have some stuff that's legislated as well, but that tends to be much fewer. Georgia is an executive state. It has a very strong executive branch. Texas, on the other hand, is a legislative state, so their legislator does a lot of stuff where they fund things with line item, and Georgia doesn't quite have that government structure. But most of my work is a combination of both hard money to help local officials on the ground understand their community, so how their community might be shifting or changing, or the state in general is shifting and changing, as well as soft monies to actually conduct that kind of research.
How big are you? I'm sorry.
The Institute's
Yeah,
pretty...
no, I heard you guys.
More than 100. We have more than 100
Yeah.
people.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're pretty sizable.
$14 million budget.
So we have a training division that specializes only in training of local officials and conflict resolution. We have an IT division as well, the Information Technology Outreach Services, or ITOS is what it stands for, where they'll host actual data and websites and do IT training for local officials. We have governmental services and research, which is where I sort of fit under, and we also have an international program, so we have a huge amount of international outreach. I was really fortunate 2 years ago to go and present at the International Union for the Scientific Study of Populations annual conference, or IUSSP. It's a conference that happens every 5 years at different locations throughout the world. And when I was over in South Korea, the Director General of the city in Busan was actually at the Vinson Institute training at the exact same time. So there's a lot of cross-pollination internationally as well.
How about around the country and other states? Any contract support in nearby states?
So I wish we had more contracts in other states. I have a strong feeling that it doesn't happen as frequently as it probably could. The only other organization that's sort of very, very similar to ours is the Stennis Institute in Mississippi. And I only know that because I was at a conference and somebody from Stennis was there presenting in my session who said, "We're just like your institute." So that was really interesting and really cool. I have had some offers for work in other states, but they end up doing things in-house instead.
Yeah.
So Minnesota went through a transition where their state demographer retired and they didn't hire a new one, and it was mid-process of producing population projections. And they reached out to me to conduct population projections for them. And as we were finalizing some of the conversations and some of the documents to go through with it, they hired another state demographer, and then everything came off.
Yeah.
So,
But that's classic one state demographer. Like there's one guy who does it.
yeah, that's generally, there's a lot of states that have a single, either one demographer who might just use what I call the ruler method.
Mm-hmm.
They just take a ruler and draw a line, and that's their projection. Or they might have a unit. So Texas has a really strong unit. California does. Virginia has a very strong unit. Florida has a really strong unit.
Mm-hmm.
Oddly, Alaska has an incredible unit as well. It just greatly depends.
Yeah.
Alabama is I know the people in Alabama are very nice and they're very good, but I have a feeling it's a ruler method as well.
One thing about the Institute of Government too is Georgia's a land grant institution, and so we fall in that branch of the university called Public Service and Outreach, where a lot like Sea Grant is in. Sea Grant is considered a sister institution to Vinson, so on the flow chart, and then you have it's part of the land grant mission. There's extension.
We should let you actually present
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you wanted to present. But
No,
it's a fascinating unit.
It's a lot of fun because I kind of view it as translation from the academy onto like actual where the rubber hits the road. Because there have been a number of problems that I've had in projects that have arisen where I then go back through the literature and I'll see that maybe somebody had the same problem 40 years ago, and then, well, I can't use what they did 40 years ago. The data is different, the times are different, the world is very different. So like as a perfect example of that, when the first time I was doing population projections for the state in 2009, we looked at some QC for the vital stats, so for births and deaths. And I found 3 counties in the state of Georgia who had fertility rates that don't make any sense. They were below 1.0. So the average woman was having less than 1 child in these 3 counties, which is not, there's no way that's true, given how many children were present in those counties. So unless like there's this insane infant migration rate where all these infants are moving into these counties without their parents, like it didn't make any sense. And so I looked through the literature to see if there's a way to correct for it, and there was a single method published in 1968 on how to indirectly estimate fertility rates. And it didn't work. The error rates in areas where we had data were north of 25%. So that left me in a really big dilemma. I had data that is in the U.S. It should be the best data, and I could not use it. And when I mapped these 3 counties, all 3 of them were on the border with Chattanooga. So they were all on the Georgia side of Tennessee, on the right across from Chattanooga. one of the counties, Dade County, is a really interesting county because a mountain range runs along its border. It's triangular in shape. A mountain range runs along its border, and for the longest time you had to go out of the state into Alabama or Tennessee to get to Dade County. And when they minted the quarter for the state quarter of Georgia, all 159 counties are represented on the quarter, but one county, and that's Dade County. It's not on the state quarter. And so when I looked at how many births were theoretically missing from Dade in particular, almost the exact same number were actually in the Tennessee. When I ran through a couple different methods and checked, it was the same amount of over. And so I came up with a new approach, probably the first indirect fertility estimation method that's been published since 1968, on how to do it very quickly. So you can now correct for this problem that I ended up running into.
Because basically the births were happening in Tennessee and they were getting recorded as Tennessee births, not as...
Right. They weren't migrating back into the Georgia vital records. So that's like a great example where I ran into a problem and I went to the academy basically and went, what's going on? How do I fix this? I need help. And then it was like, I can't, there's nothing there. Indirectly estimating vital statistics died in the 70s, where they went, we've got good enough data now, we don't need to do this. And then it kind of went back, right? It's kind of like a big cycle almost. So that's what's really cool about what we do is that we sit in this area where we translate across and we say, okay, there's a problem. How do we solve that problem? We look at the literature. It might not be there, and there's a big gap. Mm-hmm. So this right here, this actual talk fits right into that because it is a big gap that I found in the literature and sort of how to help local officials. This whole project, when looking at projections of how many people in the U.S. could be impacted by sea level rise or displaced by sea level rise, it all started as a very small project funded by Georgia Sea Grant for growth management. So there were people in coastal Georgia who had questions about what were the actual societal impacts going to be of sea level rise, and how can they manage their growth in these coastal communities. Georgia has one of the most untouched coastal salt marsh estuaries and salt marsh systems in the U.S. It's very popular to build homes in these areas. And so the question was, where are the most vulnerable areas in terms of where growth is moving to, and how can we redirect a lot of that growth? It turned out to be a very complicated problem to solve, and we had to create a brand new demographic projection methodology in order to actually undertake the process of doing that. And we published that methodology in the journal Population and Environment very recently. And we figured if we could do it in Georgia, if we could take this methodology in Georgia, there was really nothing stopping us from expanding it to the rest of the U.S. aside from just literally doing it. So what I'll be talking about here is our expanded work based on Georgia for the rest of the continental U.S. and a couple other questions and where I would hope to go with this type of research going forward. There's not going to be a lot of methodology or a lot of details. We can talk about that if you guys would like, but I figured we kind of keep it on a higher level. We can dig into the weeds. I can dig way deep into the weeds. So if you're unfamiliar about sea level rise, the projections seem to be somewhere between 1 meters and 2 meters by 2100, depending upon whose work you're kind of looking at and what publication. At the same time, 40% of the U.S. population lives in a NOAA-designated coastal community. So we have a lot of people in a coastal community, the implication being we have a lot of people at risk of sea level rise. If we wanted to do a sort of a back-of-the-envelope calculation, we would just do 40% of 320 million, and we would end up with, how many people that would be at risk of sea level rise in the U.S. That's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. But there's a lot of methodological problems in doing it that way. It's sort of like showing up to surgery with a chainsaw instead of a scalpel. And at the same time, we know, right, how many people live in a coastal area. There's no projections that currently exist for the whole U.S. So how many people are at risk of sea level rise in the United States? There currently does not exist any projections of that, what that population might be. Now, I'm not the first person to ever think about how many people could potentially be at risk of sea level rise. People have been publishing on this since at least 1985 is the earliest one I could find. Unfortunately, a lot of those approaches, as we get further along, as the literature starts to sort of develop, they suffer from a number of issues. The first is that of what I call temporal mismatch. So we're talking about a hazard between today and 2100. And so a lot of times when people look at how many people are at risk of inundation, they use a current population. So here's how many people currently live in this area. Well, if we use a current population, we're likely to underestimate how many people are going to be impacted because we're talking about, from today, an 85-year temporal trend. If we were to look backwards in time and look at doing the exact same thing, keeping the current population constant in a dynamic system, we'd end up with a gross underestimation. This is California's population over the 20th century, and this is what we would be at if we kind of kept it current today, and if we would have gone back 85 years and done the same thing. So there's a very high likelihood that if we use the current population, we end up with an underestimation of how many people could be at risk of sea level rise. At the same time, the demographic units to do analysis on this cause huge scale problems. There's a big spatial mismatch. Sea level modeling and the modeling that is undertaken by a lot of the physical scientists has come a very long way in the last decade. So here's some of the pixel sizes of the last 10 years that modelers have been using, from 100 meters all the way down to 10 meters today. They're very, very tiny.
That's a great graphic because it really puts it in perspective that people can think about. Yeah.
Very, very tiny. Yeah, I know. I love this one.
Yeah.
So the demographic units that we have the best data for is a U.S. county. So at the county level, we're going to use the same scale as the infield of a ballpark, or less. And why this is really important is to use the scale issue, because even at the county level, we're talking about hyper-localized impacts of strictly inundation risk. Here's four cities in the U.S., San Francisco, D.C., Boston, and Charleston. And what you see are county boundaries, and then in the gray, those are block group. That's the second smallest geography that the Census Bureau publishes information on. So there's almost nothing that we see countywide impacts. So properly aligning space and time is really important to looking at what the impacts might be. If we just use space, we're likely to overestimate as opposed to underestimating the impacts of sea level rise. And the last problem is it's sort of inside baseball, if you will. It's the modifiable aerial unit problem. And so this is gerrymandering. This is anytime you change a boundary 1 for Unit 1 today might not be the same boundaries for Unit 1 tomorrow. And so any type of longitudinal work becomes almost impossible to do without standardizing boundaries. So the methodology that we published in Population and Environment is a very clever workaround to the modifiable aerial unit problem. So we can actually standardize census block group boundaries from the period 1940 to today. So we end up with an 80-year time horizon, which is very, very long for small area units. So I'm really guided in this aspect in two ways. One is how many people are potentially at risk of sea level rise within the U.S., so getting an idea of the magnitude. And the second being what areas are likely to experience the greatest displacements from sea level rise. So how do we have a conversation about what the impacts are going to be of climate change or sea level rise if we have no idea on what the magnitude of that problem actually is going to be, or where it's going to be? So we're looking at 21 states in the District of Columbia, so 22 state entities, if you will. Louisiana is the only state that is excluded. It's the only state that is currently missing from NOAA's sea level rise database.
Why is that?
Louisiana has not paid to have their land mapped, to have their LiDAR flown. They have a very complicated levee system, which makes the modeling more intense, and they're also sinking.
Yes.
So you have three problems all interacting in a way that makes modeling very difficult, but even if we were to try and model both of those two aspects, we just don't have the data. So these 21 states in D.C. account for 292 counties and over 70,000 block groups. So it's a huge database. This is the most I'll talk about in terms of methods. The idea is to project the total population for all 70,000+ block groups in the U.S. We use a linear and exponential extrapolation approach to do so. It's a linear if a block group has been growing over the period 1940 to 2010, and it's exponential if it's declining. A lot of research has pointed to, for demographic projections, that a blended linear exponential approach is actually better, produces more accurate projections than either a solely linear or a solely exponential. We then use an area approach to assess the populations at risk within each individual block group, and we assess under 3 scenarios: a 1 foot, a 3 foot, and a 6 foot. Now, a block group is the smallest Census Bureau geography that they publish detailed data on. This is actually the Census Bureau's schema for their geographies. It's rather convoluted. The important thing is that the block is the smallest level, and a block group is the smallest level they publish actual data at. A block is only really used in the redistricting process, so the variables inside of a block are absolutely minimal.
But don't you need just the number of people there?
Yes.
Doesn't even include that.
But we can, the workaround uses the year structure built, and that's not included in the block data. So the blocks change. The blocks are really, really interchangeable. There's so many blocks in the U.S. They're tiny. They're really, really tiny. So here's the results of the projections for the U.S. as a whole for all 3 scenarios. The number in parentheses is the current population in those areas. So you can see that under the 3 foot and the 6 foot, it's anywhere from 3 to almost 4 times the size of the current populations that could be at risk. These are the 90% confidence intervals for the projections as well. But when we break it down into the states, it's very, very different. Again, this is going to be hyper-localized results. Under the 6 foot scenario, Florida alone accounts for just over half of the total populations that could be displaced from sea level rise. And you can see our current populations in gray underneath it. So again, much larger in a projected number.
So Matt, you're defining risk in this case as you're wet or you're dry.
Correct. When we look at it geographically, you can really see South Florida in particular, going from about Tampa around the coast up to about Jacksonville, and you can see a couple other hot spots, like the San Francisco Bay Area sticks out, in areas in New Jersey and New York as well. What makes this approach really cool and really unique when we look at it is that the actual time scales for different populations and the impacts under different curves are really important to pay attention to, and we can kind of tease that kind of information out. Here's 4 counties that I sort of picked because I liked how their projections kind of shaped. These are Charleston, Miami-Dade, San Mateo, and Monroe County, which is the Keys. And all 4 examples exhibit different curves under different scenarios. So in San Mateo County, for instance, if they're planning for sea level rise, the difference between a 3 foot and a 6 foot curve, well, there almost is no difference. I mean, the confidence intervals lay on top of each other. So if I was in San Mateo County and I was planning for sea level rise, the question shouldn't be, should we plan for 1 foot, 3 foot, or 6 foot? It's yes. Whereas in Miami-Dade, the difference between the 3 foot and the 6 foot is almost incomprehensible. Maybe Miami-Dade should pray that we don't have a 6 foot sea level rise by 2100.
Is San Mateo, is that down by San Diego, or is that?
So San Mateo is the very next county south of San Francisco County.
Okay.
And you, in your projections, do you interact then? When sea level rises, does that then affect the track of the projections?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Yes, we do.
Okay.
We do take into account feedback loops. Here's 4 counties again. These are the differences between the projected curves as well as the sea level interacted curves.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we can see very differences in terms of what is likely to occur in different communities will be affected differently. So it's very, very different in Tyrell County, North Carolina, than it will be in Broward. It's going to be very different even in Galveston compared to Broward. And again, in Pequoson, I put Pequoson up here because I think it's a really interesting case as well, because it's nearby too. We do produce results for all 292 counties. We have a very extended appendix in this results. These are ranked by the percentage of the population that would be displaced from sea level rise by 2100 under the 6-foot curve, and these are all the counties that would be over 50%. So that's a lot of displacement.
In Matthews,
That's Virginia. That's a lot.
that's big too. Yeah.
When I first moved here, we looked at a house in Pequoson that was our favorite, and then a week later, my Air Force friends at the Air Force Base said, when a hurricane comes through, you can't get into work for a week. Nope, that went off the list.
Yeah, I know. Oh, it's amazing. It's the craziest thing. If you look too, you can see Miami-Dade and Broward in particular are 3+ million people.
Yeah.
Out of a total U.S. projected displacement of 12.
Yeah.
So it's right around 1 of every 4 persons will reside in the Miami-Dade area, It's hyper localized.
Matt, we've seen a variation of this study just for the Newport News, Norfolk, Virginia Beach area, and that version, I forget the organization down by Norfolk that did it, but it also showed the effect of the tidal surges on top of these levels, so it really
question.
magnified it.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second as well.
Sorry, I got ahead.
So again, these are really tiny units that we're dealing with here and projecting individually, and then again when you aggregate up. This is a block group that I've highlighted in particular in Nassau County. This is New York. So here's New York. This is Manhattan. This is the New York City area. This block group is 1/4 of a mile by 1/4 of a mile. So it's incredibly tiny. When you look at it in terms of the county-wide, it's minuscule. So even in Nassau, a county-wide analysis in terms of the whole county of Nassau is rather goofy when we're talking about inundation when it's super localized in nature. It also, when I see something like this as well, I look at Manhattan in particular, I look at Queens, I can see Brooklyn, and they have minimal amounts of populations that are likely to be impacted from strict inundation. But in Bergen County, New Jersey, in the metro area, or Nassau County, it's very, very different. So even within a city itself, or when we think of a metropolitan area, the actual risk of inundation can be highly varied, highly varied. So the southeastern U.S. accounts for almost 70% of displaced populations. So we're talking about, again, I keep saying hyper-localized, but it's very localized in nature. I think there's 3 counties in particular that are likely to see catastrophic levels of displacement. Those are Tyrell in North Carolina and Hyde in North Carolina, and Monroe County in Florida, where over 80% of their populations are likely to be displaced.
Where are Tyrell and Hyde?
Those are in the Outer Banks.
Okay.
It's near Dare.
It's down there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's 4 counties with projected over 100,000 people that would likely to be displaced with under 3 feet or 0.9 meters of sea level rise. And there's another 28 counties with over 100,000 people displaced from sea level rise as well with 6 feet. And that Miami-Dade and Broward in particular are about 25% of those displaced persons. So what all this sort of boils down to when you look at it both in the aggregate and on the highly detailed level is that any sort of federal policy to address sea level rise on a one-size-fits-all approach is likely to be really problematic in the way it would be implemented because the variability is so extreme both on the local level, on a city level, on a state level even, and especially on a national level. A lot of approaches are going to have to be at the local level because even within a state, in Georgia alone, the difference between Liberty County, which is a coastal county, and Chatham County, which is also a coastal county, there's almost next to each other, and yet their risks associated with sea level rise are markedly different, or very, very, very different.
As I get my arms around this, is it fair to say that even these might be underestimations because the nature of feedback loops in the social phenomenon in general. I mean, as insurance rates increase, there'll be a lot of things, incentives and drivers for making people move versus today I'm dry, tomorrow I'm wet, I'm going to move when I'm wet. There would seem to be, and that could almost be a phenomenon that will build momentum, and you could have flight going on.
Right, because this is like the baseline before you start the policies, you know?
Right.
Yes.
Which is important to have that baseline.
Yes, no, absolutely. I actually have something to try and talk about that too at the tail end as well. Because I've thought about a lot of this stuff. It's the simple fact that we have no idea on even a magnitude within the U.S. to begin to have those conversations about what we should do and where and how. We try and have those conversations, but if we don't know sort of what the magnitude might be or what the baseline is exactly, it becomes really difficult to have those kind of conversations, or even to spur debate about those kind of conversations. If we end up saying New York City's going to be underwater, well, no, New York City's probably not going to be underwater. Miami, probably, but not New York City.
Matt, I'm trying to make sense of the numbers a little bit, the magnitudes. So is there a way that you can compare this with other migration that happens, so related to labor demand changes at the state level or something? Or is this very large relative to the movement away from New York that we see because of high tax rates or whatever it is, movements to the Southwest because of air conditioning?
That's a great question. So the Great Migration, what we refer to as the Great Migration of rural African Americans into the North, was 10 million people. So this magnitude, if we have 6 feet, is on par with what we call the Great Migration of the 20th century. If all of these people actually have to move, which
On par in
I'm unsure.
absolute sense, not a relative.
In an absolute sense.
In China, the last 30 years, everyone is moving from inland to the coast where the jobs are, and now they're going to have to move back.
Yeah, there's a high likelihood of and this is internationally, Bangladesh, for instance, in the Sundarban region it's a massive population. It alone, its current population dwarfs the U.S. So for that exact region.
Has there been work to kind of add to this the nature of how local government finances themselves? So tax base coming off of this, increased costs of infrastructure, and so they're getting a separation here between the money they have and the money they need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would love to be able to start looking at more of the localized impacts and the nuances that are kind of going on. So, for instance, there's been some estimates that it costs right around $1 million per resident to move to handle some of these managed retreats, especially in Alaska. So if we have $1 million per resident and we have 12 million people, that's $12 trillion, which is a lot of money. Now, it's likely to not be that high if we do a managed retreat, but at least now we can begin to talk about the dollar figures that are associated with it. The projection method relies on housing units, projecting housing units, converting housing units to population through what's called the housing unit method. And so we have projections underlying it of houses. We don't have values associated with those houses, but we would essentially have a grasp on how many houses would be at risk between now and 2100. And it's rather key because, again, like in Miami, in Broward County, if you use a current population, if you look at the maps, 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 feet, and 4 feet of sea level rise are rather minimal in terms of their impacts in Miami-Dade. In terms of inundation risk, when you move to 5 and 6 feet, it becomes extreme. It becomes like very widespread. And so, if we wait until we have 4 feet before we do something, it could be very catastrophic in those communities, especially when we start looking at local government finance.
I'd love to see this related to housing prices. You could do that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have I've thought about moving that next. Is actually look at an idea of what the property values might be associated with that could be pulled off the rolls. So how much essentially lost capital there
Lost
would be.
value.
But I'm even thinking you could see how people are already reacting to this. So one of the things that makes me think, well, maybe this isn't that big a deal because we have 100 years and houses last 50. And so if you tell people about it, it's great to tell people about it, but if they know, okay, let's stop building houses there, or if I have a house there, then my housing value is going to go down because nobody wants to buy it because of all this great information up here. then things happen. Sure, there are losers, but gradual losers over a really long time.
Right, is much better.
And you can see how that works. A market might at least help spur some of this along, and you can see it already, especially if you see innovations in the information. So if everybody thinks sea level rise is going to be 6 feet in the next 100 years, and all of a sudden a new scientific report comes out and says, no, it's going to be 6 feet in the next 4 years, then housing prices in Matthews, Virginia are going to tank, right? And then you can see how people are valuing such things.
Yeah, I don't think that's happening though, because I think that people. I mean, there's so much disbelief out there that I think that people. They really. I mean, there's just so many reasons why people don't believe the information. They don't believe the reports. It's all a communist plot. It's all a Democratic plot. It's all a plot from the white people to get the black people out of certain area. I mean, every community's got a different reason why they don't believe that what you're trying to tell them is actually true.
So that's a neat result in the data too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you would expect housing prices to tank in Matthews. If they're not, okay,
Yeah.
then we're confirming your interpretation.
You'll also be able to, if you can tag the housing prices, there'll be disproportionate wealth in homes. I mean, so some of these homes are going to be very wealthy and may invest more in protection.
Yeah, elevation.
Whereas
protection.
other areas will not be as wealthy, and so you'll have a disproportionate impact there too.
So I've heard some sort of anecdotal evidence. So take it with what that's worth. That in Miami and some of the poor. So when you actually look at the elevation maps, and for instance in Miami, some of the areas that have the highest elevation are also some of the poorest areas. And the real estate developers they're pretty savvy on this, and so they're buying up a lot of these poor neighborhoods, demolishing them, and putting condos in, high-rise condos, assuming that they're going to get way ahead of the curve.
Yeah, we're working with the Southeast community in Newport News, and they told us the other day that they not only do they not kind of buy this, but certainly everybody who lives in there thinks that this is just a plot to get them off the coastal land, so that white yuppies can live in high rises on the water. So they think that when things flood, they think it's because the city's not fixing the sewers, and the city's not fixing the sewers because it's a way to drive them out, and it's not about real flooding issues, but about sort of a lack of investment so that you can get these people off their land.
Wow.
So this whole time I've really been focusing on a sort of a binary way of thinking about and looking at sea level rise, right? And that is, you go from dry, you become wet, right? You go from being not inundated to being inundated and having to move. But it's not. It's a much more gradient process. So instead of a coin flip, it really should be a continuum in the way we look at it. And so when we think about assessing a population that's at risk of inundation or at risk of sea level rise, what are we actually referring to? Now, most of the literature refers to it as at risk of inundation, which means if you're underwater 365 days out of the year, you are now a future at-risk population. But what about if you flood 12 days a year? So this is a picture in Tybee Island, Georgia, and that's the king tide. That happens twice a year. It happens now, not on that scale, but they have pretty bad tidal flooding 13 times a month. That guy right there he's probably pretty upset that driving his car through nothing but seawater. There's no storm event that's associated with this picture. This is literally just the high tide. So how do we quantify this population? How do we quantify this effect and what this means? So as one of the things that demographers are particularly interested in is the categorization of people, putting people in the appropriate measurable categories. And so I've been doing some work of thinking about how we actually assess these kind of populations. And so I've kind of come up with 3 different sort of more nuanced classifications, and I'm not exactly set on any of these terms in particular. The one that we talk about the most is inundated, and then I say those that are directly impacted and those that are indirectly impacted. If we're looking at an aerial photo of an area, I found this photo online, I thought it was a great example. The area in red would be those who are inundated, right? That's a lot of water over an area. If you live there, you got to get out of there. The area in yellow, which directly impacted, does not come up very well when you put it in yellow, would be those who are directly impacted. There's water there, but it's not as bad. But what about those people in green? Those that are in an area that's dry but is adjacent to or next to a community that's flooded out.
And the road's flooded.
And the road's flooded, right. The road is flooded to get to their area. So how do we categorize them? And I call them indirectly impacted by inundation. And it's really important to understand the nuances that occur because the risk that's involved, the capital that's at stake, and whether or not people are going to be displaced is all tied up in terms of this sort of flood risk. So this is our inundation. This is what we think about when we think about sea level rise, right? 25 feet of sea level rise into Jefferson Memorial's underwater. New York City is going to be underwater. It's not going to be there. It's going to be the new Venice. This is a picture of Holland Island, which is a really famous example in the Chesapeake Bay that subsided and was abandoned. And of course, right, New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. It's all flooded. This is what we think about. This would be the populations that are underwater 365 days a year. This is very typical when we talk about sea level rise. We flood an area out 100% of the time. You must migrate. These people have to migrate. It goes from dry land to wetland. You cannot be there. The time frame when we talk about this inundated population, the population in red, is anywhere from 2040 to 2100. So if we're using whole foot integers, we're talking about 2040 being 1 foot under the 6 foot curve. And what it really amounts to is very much geographical isolation. These are very isolated areas across the U.S. as a whole. In terms of localized context, like in Miami-Dade, it can be a bit more widespread. But that's essentially when we talk about a population, it's very much the way we characterize it. I just am guilty of this. I literally just spent 20 minutes talking about only thinking about inundation like this. But then we also have those that are directly impacted. These are tidal flooding events that many of us should be pretty aware of in and around Norfolk in particular, but it's happening all over, especially in the southeastern part of the U.S. These are the people that are going to flood somewhere between 1 day a year and 364 days a year, or maybe half of the year, or maybe once a week. I haven't seen any I see very little discussion about this in the literature in general, but the sort of more nuanced view of populations is definitely not there. I particularly like this one because this is in New Jersey, and that's a king tide.
Where is that it's Cape May?
Yeah, that's Cape May. We have a house up there, right? Your house is basically flooding once a month.
Right, so we're calling that nuisance flooding, right?
Nuisance flooding or recurrent flooding. Absolutely. We actually had a small project where we started looking at this, and we had an economist who discounted the value of a home by the amount of time it's spent underwater. So he said if your house is underwater 10% of the time, it lost 10% of its value. And we went, well, no. If your house is underwater 10% of the time, it loses 100% of its value. Who's going to buy that home? That's crazy. It was really, really funny. He didn't last very long. So these are what I call the directly impacted, right? They're directly impacted, but they're not necessarily must migrate people, right? You can have some localized adaptive capacity. You can maybe raise your AC unit. If we look back up to this one, this is a great nuisance flood. One of the houses back there, the AC unit is actually elevated, right? You can elevate your roadways. You have some sort of elasticity in terms of what you have to do on the ground to keep people in a place. But what's really important is that the time frame that's associated with this is not 2045 or 2040. It's happening today. This is 2015. It's still geographically isolated, though it's more widespread than the inundation population. And lastly is those that are indirectly impacted. Again, this is very similar. These are people who live in these communities nearby, but they are not, their houses themselves are not underwater, right? If this is your house, you're not underwater. If you live in these high rises, you're not underwater. Maybe your parking deck isn't underwater. There's some sort of protection. You actually don't see any property damage, maybe, or minimal property damage. But yet, you have to drive your car through this 13 times a year or more. So these are the population that's on the fringes, those that are indirectly impacted. I can stay in my house for a long time because my house is fine. It's my neighbor's house that's got a problem. And so these are those that are not underwater but live near populations that are directly or indirectly impacted. these are the populations that probably won't migrate, but again, we're having a hard time wrapping around the inundated population alone, let alone these types of nuances. And again, the time frame is today to, right, the full spectrum, 2100 or longer. But the key difference between the directly impacted and the inundated is that this becomes widespread, especially in a lot of local communities. This becomes a very widespread difference.
Could give you some interesting insights on the nature of social feedback loops here too, because in Norfolk, as soon as it became much more clear to the naval station that they're flooding the road and I'm indirectly impacted, I can't get my workers to the base, and this is a national security concern, their level of engagement in the conversation in the last 3 years has been much greater than it was 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's produced a policy change or behavioral change.
Yeah, the social response has become really big.
And
Yeah.
probably looking for ways to predict that social response is challenging, but that there might be a lot of richness in those indirect impacts for predicting that.
So here's an example of how this would shake out. I looked at Chatham County because that's where Savannah is. It's in Georgia. I'm very familiar with the area. If there's 1 meter of sea level rise by 2100, there's about 57,000 people in Chatham County that would be direct, right? This would be, their houses are now underwater all the time. There's an additional 40,000 people that would be exposed to frequent tidal flooding or recurrent or nuisance flooding as well. But those that live in the communities, in the little block groups in the neighborhoods, experiencing either inundated populations or directly impacted the nuisance flooding is 340,000 people. So for the county total, that's 85% of Chatham County.
Yeah.
Now, is 85% of Chatham County going to move? That's likely not to happen. But that's 85% of Chatham County that is likely to see and experience at least once a month some type of impact from sea level rise by 2100, which is considerably smaller than the amount of nuisance flooding and those experiencing it today. Those either indirectly impacted or directly impacted. So the appropriate accounting of these people is really important to understand the impacts that might occur over the next century, how to spur people to actually begin to take action to look at this, and then on top of that, the different scenarios and what these mean for different areas, different neighborhoods, different communities, and different people. So the last thing I wanted to talk about very quickly, which is sort of where I kind of hope research kind of moves to in this way, aside from a more nuanced view, and that is how people will actually adapt to rising seas. So I had a really great question at a colloquium in Savannah. A county commissioner asked an oceanographer, are these people that are going to be displaced, are they just going to move inland? Are they going to abandon ship and go somewhere else? And he said, I don't know, they'll probably move landward, about 10 miles. Well, that makes sense if you're thinking about marshes, and you model marshes because marshes migrate. But maybe people don't. So maybe people won't migrate landward with the water as it rises, but maybe they will, or will they completely abandon areas? So most of the literature that we talk about displacement comes from 3 main sources, or 3 main analogs or examples. That of Holland Island in the Chesapeake Bay, St. Kilda Island, which is outside of Scotland, which was a managed retreat in the 70s, and the Carteret Islands, which are supposed to be undergoing a managed retreat right now, already today. But I think of those 3 examples that are very widely cited, the Holland Island one is very, very widely cited. There's some problems with looking at these 3 examples. The first is that only Holland Island is not a managed retreat. So the Carteret Islands is a part of a managed retreat, or should be a part of a managed retreat right now. St. Kilda Island was a managed retreat in the 1970s, and Holland Island was not a part of a managed retreat. It was a part of wholesale abandonment. It had happened in 1918, though. So when people decided to abandon the island, where they decided to go after that, it's 100 years ago. We have very little actual information of what that happened. So what does organic abandonment look like, or what did people do on the ground to adapt to it when it was happening, to the land subsidence? All those we don't know. All 3 of these are island settlements, and I would argue that an island is going to experience very different approaches to managing sea level rise than a mainland population. Right? You have encroachment from all sides versus an encroachment from one direction, or two, or even three, are going to be very, very different. And the largest one is the Carteret Islands, which is right around 600 people. Yet the projections globally are right around 187 million people. So when you take all three of these examples and put them together, it's around 1,000 total people. So we're using the experiences of 1,000 total people to extrapolate what this might mean for 187 million people in the world. So I was actually watching an HBO show when I had an inspiration. Something hit me, like a eureka
Nice.
moment.
Game of Thrones.
I was watching True Detective.
Oh, that's a really good show.
And I went, Louisiana is perfect for this. I think that coastal Louisiana, is a great example to look at how populations might change or adapt because of sea level rise. For one, coastal Louisiana is a mainland population, and it's experiencing land subsidence. It's lost 33% of its coastal land area since 1932. So we end up with a time horizon that mirrors or mimics the time horizon associated with sea level rise on amount of land loss, similar to the amount of land loss in some areas to sea level rise. At the same time, coastal Louisiana currently has right around 1.6 million people in it. So we're talking about a large mainland population experiencing land subsidence that's likely to or historically, that mimics what we'll experience in sea level rise going forward. I have some preliminary work, but I'm out of time. So we got this great slide if you want to connect.